let's just jump right in and say again thank you to both Curtis and Adil for hosting this. I'm going to give just a 50,000 feet view, sort of overview rather, of the field of crisis mapping. And this is not just me and Jen's thinking. This is really what we've learned from the Crisis Mappers group over the past few years. So I won't necessarily go into specifics. I'll keep it rather broad and look at sort of broad sort of brushstrokes in the field of crisis mapping, and then go straight to a discussion, because I think this is still very much an ongoing conversation, and we're learning with every deployment, including the most recent in the earthquake in New Zealand. So very quickly, why do we even think about crisis mapping, and what is crisis mapping all about? Well, I think what crisis mapping is it belongs within this broader field of live data and live maps. If we have a cemetery or a map of a cemetery, and it's somewhat tongue-in-cheek that we can have a static map of a cemetery because a cemetery doesn't really change that much, but we know full well that the world around us changes quite often. So this is an interesting visualization.
Press 1
of
to
light,
enter the conference. For the host,
coming in and
please
out
enter star, your PIN.
Of the U.S., and hopefully you can see the video animation. I think this is
Press
pretty telling.
1
I think
to enter the
this
conference.
is an organic
For the
live
host,
map.
please enter star, your PIN.
I think we need to move beyond this idea that maps are simply static and paper-based, right? And
Goodbye.
for many of us, we're getting more and more used to that, but I still think that when we talk about maps, people are thinking about static. But right here, what you see here is, for me, that's a live map. That's a map of what's happening. It shows dynamics. It shows proportionally how things are moving relative to each other. And I think what's really interesting here is that you don't actually see the layout or the border of the U.S., but the flights that are moving and the data that's moving in that map actually reveal the underlying structure. They reveal why the flights are there and not somewhere else. And I think that's a good analogy and a good metaphor for crisis mapping and live mapping, that providing this kind of data dynamically allows us to see structures and underlying patterns that may otherwise not be immediately visible. So in terms of crisis mapping, there are 4 components of crisis mapping that we've been talking about ever since the 2009 International Conference on Crisis Mapping, and they're really quite intuitive, and they're nothing sort of spectacular and surprising, but we do see 3 core components of crisis mapping: the collection of that information that will end up on a map, and we're seeing, and as I'll give you some examples, an increasing variety of ways to collect live data for mapping purposes. And obviously then visualizing that data, there are many bad ways. There are more bad ways to visualize data than there are good ways. And this is also not terribly completely new. I mean, cartography's been around for decades. The idea now is we're dealing with live maps, and how does cartography adapt to live data? And then analyzing that data. Sometimes we can do visual analysis, just like I showed with that animation of flight. Sometimes you can just look at a dynamic map and see some patterns emerging. But oftentimes what we also need to do is leverage geospatial analysis and spatial econometrics to really get at underlying hidden patterns. And then we're doing this because it's more than just an academic exercise. We're looking at using these crisis maps for very real emergencies and crises around the world. And just to step back here, also, when we talk about crisis in the context of crisis maps, I want to make sure that, at least for many of us in the crisis mapping field, that is crisis in its broadest terms, not only just fast-paced, acute crises, but also slow burn, gradual sort of crises as well. And it's not just limited to political crises and acute natural disasters, but I think looking at poverty as a crisis as well and trying to depict that on our crisis map is part of what we think about crisis mapping. So what I'll do now is just give you a few examples of all these 4 different components of crisis mapping. And I wanted to start with this slide because I think it's important that while we focus on technology and while we talk about technology and we adapt the technology, that this doesn't take away from the basic pen and paper approach of information collection, right? Information that's being collected with these kind of survey methods are very much still part of what crisis mapping is about. it's not just using SMS, but it's realizing that these tried and true and tried methods that we've used in the field of ICT for development and other survey-based type fields still are very much valid. All we're doing right now
to enter the conference. For the host,
adding,
please enter star, your PIN.
Is adding a geographic component to the information that's being collected.
Press 1 to enter the conference. For the host, please enter star, your PIN.
So another example is with our colleagues UNDP in the Sudan. They have a mapping and analysis program, and the way that they collect information is exactly how you see here. They have focus groups across different states in the Sudan where they let local communities themselves map the major threats, vulnerabilities to their environment. And then this information from these paper maps are taken back to Khartoum and added to a GIS platform. And this is all done manually. Walking papers is something that's been around for a year or two now, and it's sort of the basic idea. You basically print out a map like this of the area you want to go and do some mapping on, and you take your pen and you print out this piece of paper, and you go out and you annotate the map with dots and what have you. And then the idea is you can go back and scan it and automatically geotag and create a dynamic online map of the information that you wrote down in a paper map. So what we're doing now, or our colleagues at Steinman and the UC Berkeley, is they're looking to move beyond the scanner, because obviously not that many people have scanners, and allowing people to take pictures once you've actually done the annotation on your paper map, and then be able to send that picture via email from your smartphone to a map. Now, I was just in Haiti a week ago, and I was talking to the OpenStreetMap team down in Haiti, and they don't even do that, actually. They find enough value just using this printout map and then going back to a computer and then manually digitizing the information that they annotated on the paper-based form. So, and this is, again, just like what the colleagues in Sudan are doing with UNDP. So it can very much really be very low-tech, and there are low-tech solutions. Front-end SMS, rapid SMS, there are a number of other solutions that allow for SMS integration. Clearly, this can play an important role in some cases. Smartphone apps and integration and so on with other online platforms like Twitter and Flickr, I think are very much something that we're seeing being used increasingly in crisis mapping deployments, and most recently with the crisis camp in New Zealand, really looking at multiple sources of media and mapping that information in real time. And this was supposed to be a Libya Google map, but I didn't get the chance. There's an interesting pattern going on right now with the Middle East and the unrest, and people immediately going to maps and wanting to create maps. But there's been an interesting map using just simple Google map maker from Libyan activists creating a map of what's happening around them. So it doesn't have to be fancy kind of software or what have you. You can just use the basics of what's around you. In terms of what we're going to see possibly be an interesting development, and it's certainly not just Shahidi, but the idea of applying check-ins from Foursquare that you might be familiar with, and taking that into the crisis mapping space. I know OCHA has been talking about this for a few months as well, and looking to provide smartphone apps and online solutions for their disaster responders to check in and check out of an area. And this brings us to one point that I think is worth saying, is that we're seeing an increase in generation of user content, right? And from multimedia sources and so on. And you see this picture, I think, is quite telling, because you see all these different individuals that are capturing this event. This was in 2009 during the election protests in Iran, but this can be said of today in Egypt and Tunisia and the Sudan. People are collecting and documenting information and events that are happening, and then they're going home and uploading it. And the trick will be to bring all that information back in one place that you can start triangulating.
Press 1 to enter the conference. For the host, please enter star, your PIN.
This crowdsourced information in one place. So we're seeing some potential solutions in that respect.
Press 1 to enter the conference. For the host, please enter star, your PIN.
Not only Swift River, but their private sector initiatives that are trying to now find solutions that will help curate automatically and also with human interaction a lot of content that's coming in and making sense of it. Satellite imagery is another important part of all this. This is a map from UNISAD, and the folks have been doing some great work not only here but also with the Satellite Sentinel project on the Sudan. We can start identifying information and events as they are unfolding using satellite imagery. Lars Bromley and others will tell you that there's certainly challenges to that, and it's not automatic, and interpreting satellite imagery is not something that's easily done and requires training and so on. But we are increasingly capturing events or evidence of major events that are unfolding thanks to satellite imagery. If you don't have a satellite, Jeff Warren and other colleagues with the Grassroots Mapping Initiative have been looking at low-cost solutions using maps, using balloons to do aerial imagery, and they've been doing some really great work. And again, that allows you to start capturing information in a way that is sometimes higher resolution, maybe most of the time higher resolution, and can be done more quickly, more rapidly than trying to get imagery from a satellite, and also obviously a lot cheaper. There's also online parsing, natural language processing algorithms that are being used, and this is just one of many examples of this being applied to crisis events and crisis mapping. There are groups in Hungary that have been doing a really good job on doing this kind of automated online mapping. So this is not just to suggest that there's just one, but there are multiple initiatives that are all trying to get curating either automatically or via human interaction information in real time. And the idea here is to try and see how this can be all mashed up. So this was an interesting mashup that ESRI did in the flooding in Queensland and in Australia, where they were pulling in official disaster information with social media and crowdsourced information, putting all that in one place. And I think what came to mind when I was looking at this map was this idea of borrowing the term of augmented reality. Yes, the disaster response official will have that immediately, hopefully, or at least validated information that they've been able to confirm, and they're providing that information as quickly as they can. But I think what social media allows you to do is augment that information, like the idea of augmented reality. Of course, that keeping in mind that there's validation issues in terms of real-time crowdsourced data. But the mashups, I think, allow you to triangulate and serve as a control mechanism, especially if you have official disaster response data. Moving into the analysis, this is just to give you a flavor of the different pillars of crisis mapping, from information collection, visualization, analysis, and then response. This is just a map of a colleague of mine at Yale at the time put together a few years back, and what he was doing was looking at vegetation data, which is more accessible than crisis data and has longer baselines, and a lot of it is free. And looking at just environmental vegetation data, forage data, you look at patterns, and then in a place like Darfur, vegetation, impact on vegetation of the forced movement of individuals and ethnic cleansing obviously will leave some kind of footprint on an area that is already arid or semi-arid. And the idea is to start looking at other data for proxies to find patterns in what's going on. Jen Zemke, the co-founder of the Crisis Mappers Group, has been doing also for her dissertation some really pioneering work, which is really leveraging geospatial analysis, spatial econometrics to test hypotheses, to look for patterns on abuses against civilians versus armed combatants and so on, and she can tell you more in the Q&A. And I know that she's also been playing around with geotime, and for the first time able to visualize her data in 3 dimensions. She has said more than once has been huge in terms of finding patterns that otherwise are not immediately visible in 3D. And this is another example of a geotime screenshot, and where you can start looking at patterns and start testing different hypotheses and looking. This is an example of a shooting and trying to identify who might have been responsible, where and when for the shooting, based on all these different sources of evidence. So 3D mapping, I think, is something that's promising, and that I hope to see more of in the crisis mapping space. moving in terms of response, I didn't want to get too much into anything really related to shahidi because I think people are familiar with that. And what I want to do is give a big picture overview of crisis mapping. And there's a lot more to crisis mapping than obviously there is to shahidi. So we had nothing to do with this Snowmageddon Washington Post map, we being shahidi. Others put this together, but what I really liked about this, which we hadn't seen before, was categorizing problems but also solutions, allowing people to suggest solutions and to say, okay, I can help, and so on. And I think this is an interesting trend that we're seeing. I know that our colleagues of ours in Russia did the same thing with their crisis mapping efforts during the forest fires in August and September. I remember them telling us, well, we don't want to map where the fires are. People will know. Satellite imagery is there, and others are doing a better job at that. We want to provide a help map where people can start doing something about the crisis. This was an example of how an Egyptian group during the unrest in Egypt were mapping the events that were unfolding, and they were using this part of Ushahidi. Obviously, if you don't speak Arabic, I apologize, but I can tell you that what this allows you to do is subscribe to alerts by SMS or email, and to subscribe to a specific area, geographic area. So if you were in Alexandria in a particular neighborhood, you could say, I'm in this area and I only want to get alerts that fall within this particular spatial area, and I want those alerts on my phone. And the idea here in terms of response is to try and improve situational awareness in real time and what we call real space. It's more actionable information if you know that something is happening at the corner of a particular street rather than in Cairo, because that's not going to give you very specific information. So this idea is something that we've been thinking about and increasingly referring to this as crowd feeding. That crowdsourcing is great and crisis mapping is great, especially as we see these new, more and more open source software and free software that others are using. We're seeing more of a democratization of map making, in large part thanks to Google Maps and Google Earth in 2005. It's really just demystified sort of mapping. And OpenStreetMap have really done played a pivotal role in democratizing these tools and allowing people to tell their own story through crisis mapping, and they've been using crowdsourcing. But I think what we're seeing more and more is the need to get that information right back to the crowd, and not just get alerts right back to the crowd that have been generated from the crowd in the first place, like what's happening in New Zealand right now, but also, as colleagues in Samoa are starting to do more and more, is providing not only crowdsourced and crowd feeding, but also information on what you can do if you get this kind of information. So not just, oh, there's flooding in your area, but there's flooding, and this is what you can do about it, and providing more information on actions that can be taken and informed actions. And this is just something that I've learned in the field of conflict early warning, where 5-10 years ago, it was assumed that it was enough to simply have an early warning and communicate that early warning to local communities or to the UN or other organizations. But especially when it comes to local communities that are faced with a particular crisis, that often it's not enough just to send out the alerts, that it's important to also provide information on what they can do to keep safe or what measures they can take to get out of harm's way. So I've just got a couple more slides, and I wanted to say, just from a personal point, one of the things that I didn't see 3 years ago or 4 years ago when Jennifer Leaning and I started the crisis mapping program at the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, this was back in 2007, we weren't really thinking so much about the social networking aspects of this, but clearly over the past year and the work that Andy Carvin has been doing even before Ushahidi was ran, the social networking component has been really something that struck me as critical. I think that oftentimes, while the map, being the end product in some respects is really important, it shows you what's happening, when it's happening, and we're creating these live maps. What I've seen as a positive externality or as a positive byproduct of all of this is that it's working on these crisis mapping efforts that have brought communities together across multiple different sectors, and it's connected people, and it's catalyzed conversations, and it's catalyzed collaboration that otherwise wouldn't have really maybe happened. I mean, it's incredible to see the kind of collaboration that happened around Haiti and to some extent as well in Chile and Pakistan, and what's happening right now in New Zealand. It's really connecting people, and it's creating networks, collaborative, proactive networks that otherwise wouldn't have been connected. And what we've seen with Haiti and Chile is that these networks come back. Many of these individuals who've been traded come back and collaborate again, and these networks expand. And you have more and more individuals who are more and more trained in being able to do that. And I think that's a really positive externality. And I think it's sometimes as important, if not more important, than the map that results. But that's my own personal take. So in closing, I think we're really, even though we started looking at crisis mapping more formally in 2007 and calling it crisis mapping and trying to formalize the field and trying to make this field more visible, because there's so many interesting individuals doing interesting work and trying to connect these individuals, I think we're still very much at the beginning. There's still major challenges, and we're learning by doing. We don't have all the answers, and I think, again, just over the past 48 hours with Crisis Commons and Crisis Camp folks and other volunteers and the Crisis Mappers group and many, many others coming together and collaborating and creating a live map of the situation in New Zealand, I've learned a ton just in the last 48 hours and seeing the challenges, but also seeing the solutions that people come up with. So with every deployment of this, and the Standby Task Force and Humanity Road played a pivotal role here as well with providing media monitoring support. And I think they've had about 400 events now mapped in the last 48 hours, which is really remarkable. And we're learning. It's been really interesting to see the conversations on Skype, because, again, if there's something that has not had enough focus on all of what we've been doing, I think, over the past year or two, is the incredible role of Skype. I remember a colleague of mine saying we can't work on email anymore because email is too slow. If you told that to people like 10 years ago, or even a few years ago, they'd look at you, I think, in a strange way. But it's true. I think we've gone to this idea of using Google Groups, many-to-many communication, and Skype is many-to-many. And just following the Skype chats around this New Zealand deployment has been really interesting to see the conversations that happen about releasing a short code, and people are more and more aware of, okay, we don't want to raise our expectations. So you see here they qualify. If you have an emergency, call the official number. This is more a sort of a volunteer-based initiative. But this deployment has also raised a number of questions that I think still need to be addressed, and it's not just this deployment. I think it goes to the heart of crisis mapping. And we see here, in New Zealand, this is a permissive environment, but what I think the Crisis Mappers group has been wrestling as well in terms of challenges is this idea, what do we do when we're doing live mapping in hostile environments, in non-permissive environments like Libya, like Egypt, like the Sudan? There's some real security issues. And I think there's still very much a lot to learn from those deployments. So my last slide is something that we often share at Ushahidi, but I think it goes for a lot of the technology in this space. And it's really that the technology is getting easier. I mean, it's not perfect, and we've got a lot to learn, and there's still bugs, and things are still breaking, and things are still too hard if you're not tech savvy, perhaps. But if you look over the past couple of years, that has really improved drastically. But I think what we see as the technology barrier does drop, we see obviously more and more people getting in the game, and this is all part of democratizing these tools and allowing people to use these tools for what they want. And I think more and more people are realizing that just launching a Google map, or just launching a Sahana platform, or just launching OpenStreetMap and so on is the easy bit. It's a 90% that has almost nothing to do with technology, really. That really is the challenging bit, and has been the challenging bit for decades, right? It's what we struggle with. It's what the field of ICT for development struggles with. Human rights struggles with other fields is the actual doing the work part, independent of the technology. And I think it's just ending on this slide and realizing that, again, what we've seen with New Zealand being one of the latest crisis mapping efforts is it takes a lot of human collaboration. It takes a lot of talking. And just this morning, when I woke up and I saw the updates on Skype, there were 800 individual IMs overnight of people collaborating on these platforms, and that collaboration, needs to happen. Just launching a map will be no substitute for that kind of human interaction. So I will. I'll pause there, and looking forward to. I think we have time for 20 minutes of conversation. So feel free to unmute. I don't know, Adil, if you want to possibly moderate, and we'll take it from there. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just. Yep, can you guys hear me?
Yes, I kind of do.
Okay, excellent. So what I'm going to do is, if we can, just to keep things simple here, if you could ask your questions in the chat is what we're going to do at this point, just because we're having some audio troubles on our end. To avoid that, what we're going to do is just ask our questions in the chat, and I'll have Patrick and answer them as they come through. Does that sound all right to you, Patrick?
Yep, super. Thank you. That works. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to unmute Jen right now. Sorry. And
so we'll take questions from the chat, right?
Yeah. Any questions in the chat there? All right.
Patrick, I see there's some questions coming through the chat. One from Sentil, asking, have we mapped all the crisis mappers spread out across the globe? It'd be great to see a Google map with approximate locations, March, which would help organize meetups and collaboration.
Yeah, there's been talk about that. What we've thanks for the question. So for the Standby Volunteer Task Force, I know that George had put together a cloud map of the 150 or so volunteers there. I think it's something that we should also think of doing, and regardless of the platform. So maybe I'll talk to Christian from Google, who's on the chat here and on a call, and we can create a Google map that's easy to create and allows people to basically map themselves, because there are about 1,200 of us now, I think, in the Crisis Mappers Network. So if all of us could put ourselves on that map, that would be great. We might want to also make it more structured, in which case we could possibly use a new Shady platform or a Google map and allow people to answer a couple of questions in terms of not only where they are, but what their main foci are and main projects and so on. So we'll follow up on that, and I think it's a great idea, especially if it's easy visualization and it's intuitive, then we can do that. So let me see if so let's see, Sarah, where do we go next? I think you're asking just in terms of the field. That is a really good question, and I'm hoping this year we're going to move towards. I think what we've seen over the past 2 or 3 years is people really piloting these new technologies and really serving as the pioneers of these technologies. I mean, the vast majority. I'll speak, about Ushahidi just because that's the experience that I'm most familiar with. Is, the majority of the time we're not involved in any way, shape, or form with Ushahidi deployments that people use. So we are learning from them more than anything else. We're learning from those who are actually going out and using these platforms, and I think what we've seen over the past 2 or 3 years is an evolution of sorts. People are learning how to use the platforms better, and they are getting a hand of the technology. But I think what we're seeing now is an interest amongst those using these platforms to go beyond just mapping, right? And to make sure that response component, that fourth pillar of crisis mapping, is very much integrated within crisis mapping efforts. That it's not just, okay, we'll put dots on a map, but it'll be actual kinetic response and physical responses. And what we've seen in Egypt, it was an interesting question during the elections in November, December, when an Egyptian group used Ushahidi. The question with everything that they mapped is whether any of the 2,000, 3,000 reports that they mapped and curated on the fraud around the the elections, whether any of this has been then submitted to the courts in Cairo and in Egypt, in terms of their legal, judicial sort of channels that are open in Egypt to submit complaints around the election. So I'd love to see, in terms of moving forward, I'd love to see the information that's being mapped really used and showing the impact of that information more. But you're right, yes, lots to be done. In terms of high volume Ushahidi instances, I think, again, what's interesting is that technology can be part of the solution. So everything that we've built with the Ushahidi platform is we're trying to make it as easy as possible to share with GRSS feeds and so on. So you can pull in data from multiple Ushahidi platforms, and we saw this happen in Haiti as well, where the Marine Corps was pulling in the Ushahidi map or data from the map and pulling it into their own mashups. So that's being done, and I think again, though, technology will only be half the problem. I think the issue you're getting at is we need to collaborate better. We need to set up networks that are connected beforehand as much as possible, and protocols on how we're going to collaborate, how we're going to share information, and so on. And to a large extent, that's what the Standby Volunteer Task Force is trying to do, is trying to be better prepared in handling the data that's coming in, handling the multiple instances that are coming in, and so on. I don't have all the answers, so I'm glad to see that others are chiming in with their thoughts as well. So please do so. Let's see. Any other questions? Or Melinda, great question. I'm just going to make sure that I haven't. Let me see. I'm taking these questions in orders. Would local projects help develop the skills for new mappers that are now sure they want to jump in during a disaster? Absolutely. The more we can localize these efforts, the better. So I know that an example here is Crisis Camp New Zealand, right? Part of the Crisis Commons network. The project there is localized, and the reason that we activated the Standby Volunteer Task Force, and I think we have members from about 18 different countries now, is because there was a local connection. So we will support as much as we can local projects, but we want to go beyond that. So one of the main roles at this, I'll just talk about what I know best, and others can chime in terms of their own experience. But with a Standby Volunteer Task Force, one of the core roles that we're playing is expanding the number of volunteers. We've got about 150. We hope to double that in the next few months, and to set up local task force hubs in different countries. And in terms of Ushahidi, that's also something that we're trying to do with our Universities for Ushahidi initiative. Is we've seen that students play a phenomenally important role, a really critical role in all kinds of activist sort of areas, but also disaster response and crisis. And we're trying to localize these efforts as well with this Universities for Ushahidi initiative. So I hope that partly answers the question. I want to make sure that I had Melinda's. Ushahidi is archived at all. We're trying to make that more easy to get to. So one thing that we're launching, I believe next week actually, is a new page on our website, which will be a research and a data page. And the research page will include something like 100 different publications that have to do with Ushahidi crisis mapping writ large. And this will be a live page, so more and more people, we hope, once we put this resource out there, will share their master's theses and their publications, so that we continue having one place where people can look at all the research. And there's been so much research done over the past year alone on crisis mapping and Ushahidi platforms. And then part of this, we'll have a data page. And what we've been doing over the past 6 months is we've been approaching different groups that have deployed the Ushahidi platform and basically asking them if they could send us their data. So we'll have one place where all this data can be shared. We've also gone one step further, is we've structured that data the same way so that people can download the data sets and all these structures in the same way. And we've also provided a Stata format. And Stata is an analysis tool that allows you to start performing econometric analysis on the data. So we'll have about a dozen or so data sets all there. And we hope that it will just be the beginning of this. We hope that as people see that we're collecting these data sets, that more people who are using Ushahidi for data collection will voluntarily share their data sets on this page. I'm really hoping that this will be just the beginning of this. So I hope that answers your question. Let me see if I missing anything. Sarah, catalog of efforts. I think that's a great idea. I think there's some conversation that started in the crisis mappers groups as well. Good to know the global pulse of something like that. Also, how do we entice more mappers? How do we improve the signal to noise ratio in shady? That's a fantastic question. I think enticing more mappers is also a good question. And what we're trying to do with the standby task forces, and first of all, I'd say it's incredible to see what we saw in Haiti and Chile and in Pakistan, and what we're seeing now in New Zealand is people will rally. People will, if you give them an easy way to participate, and you give them something to do that's meaningful, and that they see as much as possible the fruits of their labor, I think people will want to help. I think it's a human reaction to want to help, and I think it goes back to this management part: is how do we allow that helping to happen in an easy way? This is again what we're trying to do with the standby task forces. Is we're pitching it not only as a way to, hey, you can actually, this is a meaningful way that you can help out when there's a crisis, but also you're developing some skills. You're developing skills that none of my professors at my university have, right? These are skills that people are developing now. So the folks who are using Ushahidi, who are using Sahana, and have been for years in terms of Sahana and other tools, are the ones who are really pioneering all this and learning how to do this. And so there's a lot of learning happening. And I think one way to make yourself more valuable on the market and within the crisis mappers community, whether it's with the UN or with the Google Crisis Response Team or OpenStreetMap, is to learn these tools, to learn about these tools, to learn how to use OpenStreetMap for humanitarian operations, and to put all that on your CV. You're going to become somebody who has skills that many people in the professional humanitarian world are very much learning, and media monitoring and so on. And a lot of, I won't mention the organizations, but a lot of established humanitarian organizations are coming to the Standby Task Force and to individual members and individual groups within the Standby Task Force, asking for training on how to do real-time media monitoring and curation of information and so on. So I think it's an opportunity for professional development, and I think this should be something we say right up front. Yes, there's a lot of people in the Standby Task Force, and more wanting to join as well, and more wanting the task force to provide specific training to them. So, and I should say that's another, I think, enticement is in terms. Again, there are other initiatives here. This task force is not the only one, but that's the one I know the best. So that's what I feel comfortable speaking about. But I think that's another enticement for people to join the task force. Is as Sarah is saying, that the UN people there already. There are seasoned humanitarian practitioners who have joined the task force because they see value in it. So people who join the task force who have no background in this get to work not only with crisis mappers who have learned what they're, how to use these tools, but also get to work with the pros themselves. And I think it's a great opportunity to grow your skill set. And we have a workflow that allows people who have no background whatsoever, they join a specific what we call the task team. And you learn by doing it. And a lot of this, we provide training as well in between disasters. There's also learning by doing. So it's really hands-on, and I think that entices people, and just getting the word out is one way to do it. And I think students are well placed to learn these skills, especially undergrads and graduate students who are going to go on and graduate and want to do this for as a job, to be paid to do this kind of work. So I've spoken a lot now. I don't know if there is any more. Signal to noise ratio. Huge issue, and I think something that I'd like to see more of in terms of trying to improve that. and it goes with the answer or with the comment I was making regarding the, where do we go from there, what next? And it's using this data for impact purposes as well. So signal-to-noise ratio, I mean, I can talk about the Swift River platform. We're trying to provide tools, free and open source tools that help you leverage automated natural language processing and automated tagging with human curation to get a better signals-to-noise ratio from crowdsourced information. I think we'll do 5 more minutes of this Q&A. So I know I don't want to take too much more of anybody's time, but I think other solutions or partial solutions to signal-to-noise ratio is doing whether bounded crowdsourcing is the right word or not. It is limiting the network that can share information, and maybe then increasing that network over time. But if there's one group like Internews or Internews using local journalists, or IOM in Haiti using local journalists to curate information, then the signal-to-noise ratio becomes better. You're controlling the funnel, you're controlling how information comes in, and you're not opening up the floodgates of information. So that's another way to try and improve signal-to-noise ratio. But again, I think that's a tough issue, and I definitely think others will have other thoughts about how do we improve that. We're getting a lot of texts wanting to help. Yes, I think that's another push in terms of demographics. Thanks for all your questions, Sarah. I think this is something that Crisis Commons and the Crisis Camp movement is trying to do as well. It's something that we're trying to do with the Crisis Mappers group. I mean, it's fairly impressive that we have 51 or so countries, but why not double? And what I'd like to see is more and more decentralized, distributed efforts around crisis mapping. There's no reason for us in the U.S. to necessarily be involved if something happens in, say, Singapore, right? We'd love to see the crisis mappers and crisis camps and Sahana folks who are already involved in some of these regions take the lead, and us maybe back in the U.S. or Europe simply taking a supporting role. But I think getting the word out, I think as we have these deployments in these different parts of the world, like New Zealand and others that are, of course, going to come along this year, is to make sure that we don't just do the deployments and then pack up and go home kind of thing. I think one example is again in Haiti. What was great in Haiti was we were able to identify a local Haitian software company that was really agile, really proactive to take on the work of the Crisis Mappers group and the Ushahidi Haiti efforts, so that they have their own now crisis mapping platform localized. They've got their folks trained and so on. So I hope that answers that question. I'll see if there's anything. Yes. So again, in terms of the students, we're trying to do this both with the Standby Task Force and the universities for Ushahidi idea, trying to tap into students abroad. And we're going to be bringing students from about 10 different developing countries around the world to DC in July for a 1-week hands-on training on peace building and Ushahidi, as well as OpenStreetMap and Frontline SMS. But it's an integrated training on peace building, conflict resolution, conflict negotiation with the tools. And the idea about bringing, this is just the first year, we're hoping to do this on a yearly basis for years to come, is that these 10 students from these 10 different countries then go back to their home countries after this 1 week of training. And part of the deal is they then set up their own universities for Ushahidi training group within these universities. And I see Nadia speaking of SIPA here. That's what SIPA has been doing. They're now passing the baton, so to speak, from year to year as a class graduates. The new class that comes in gets trained in these platforms. They get trained on crisis mapping, on crowdsourcing, and so on, so that they will have an ongoing crisis mapping new media group at Columbia. So I think there are efforts, and I think the idea here is to try and continue to to scale. Sarah, yeah, definitely get in touch with Jacqueline or Sawako, or get in touch with me. I'll put you in touch with the New York folks. I think they were involved they spearheaded the efforts in Chile last year, and they've been involved in a number of other crisis mapping support initiatives, and so they're one of the best trained, together with the Tufts Fletcher School group, they're one of the best trained universities out there. So by all means, reach out to the Tufts Fletcher group, reach out to the New York SEPA group, and also reach out to the Standby Task Force. Oh, good. Nadia and Matt have taken over. There you go. So I will end with that. If there are any questions, please, Jen and I are available at any time. As you can see, this is more than just a talking group, but we're all about really being proactive and doing. Please join the task force. If you haven't, you can just email join@standbytaskforce.com or email me or Jen at crisismappers.net. We want to be as responsive as possible to your projects, and we want to make this group, the Crisis Mappers group, as useful to you as possible. And like I said, we're very much a learning and doing group. And so thank you very much. I think I'll end it with that. We'll have another Crisis Mappers webinar in a couple of weeks. I believe Sanjana from ICT for Peace will be giving that presentation. He is one of the most experienced people in this space. He's been around this, in this field for many, many years, and I very much encourage you to join that webinar as well. I always learn a ton every time I speak with Sanjana, so hope we'll see you there. Let's continue the conversations. Join us on the Google group, start a forum on the crisismappers.net website, and let us know how we can help connect you or how we can help out and promote your projects and the great work that every member of this community is doing. So awesome. Thank you very much. And thanks again to Geotown. Pleasure.
Thank you very much, Patrick and Jen, for your time today. As Patrick mentioned, we will be doing another webinar series sometime in the near future. We will hopefully have the audio issues sorted out by then, so we'll have more phone interaction. Again, please do not hesitate to contact us with any questions that you may have. So I'll be closing off the session right now and closing phone lines. But again, thank you very much for everyone for joining us today.
Thank you very much to Adil and Curtis at Oculus Geotime for hosting this for us, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks, Patrick, as well. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.